Hi everybody, this is Stephen Pugh. We're going to continue with video number 14 for the City and Guilds carpentry course, and we're going to be picking up on the question of using a circular saw, table saw. Now, the first thing about understanding how to do this is that we have two different actions that can be done on a large circular saw. The one is ripping, and there's a few others we'll talk about later, but let's talk about ripping first of all. Now, ripping is something that really is where the large circular saw comes into its own. This circular saw is designed to be used with the blade at the maximum height. So the blade will be at the maximum height, and the crown guard will come right the way down over the top of the blade, and we'll get to a point in which the nose guard, which is a little bit on the front of the crown guard, will come down, and it'll come down to within 12 millimeters, or some people say 8 millimeters, but near enough, 12 millimeters or 8. I think 12 is what the book says. Come down to that position, and will then protect the operator from the blade. So the timber then is set up in such a way the fence is put at the correct distance, and the timber is passed through the saw. And as it's passed through the saw, it's very important that you use push sticks. Now, a push stick is just a stick, but of course we try to make them a little bit more comfortable. We have a rounded end on the one end. We make them about 450 long. And at the other end, you can have two things. You can either have a little V shape so that you can push the wood, or you can use a little nail tapped into the end that's got a sharp point on it, so you can point at the wood. So both of them work just the same. It's very, very important that that carpenters and joiners and you people on this course get used to using a saw like this, and I might suggest that it takes probably no more than a few hours of using it to get into the swing. It's very important when you're using that saw in that particular way that you don't have the wood in front of you. It must always go across your body, must always go, you stand to one side and feed it in. The right hand normally is at the far end pushing it, and the second hand, then the left hand, is nearer the blade and is actually pushing it through the saw. The reason why we do that is because if ever there's a problem and the wood has to be released, it gets stuck and is thrown by the saw, it's going to go away from you. It's not going to come towards you. So you never stand behind a saw. And of course there's lots of other cutting. For example, there's the cutting of very large pieces of timber, or the cutting of quite large boards. And when this is done, obviously having a colleague to help you is very important, and having a long outfeed table is also very important. And in fact, not only can you have an outfeed table, but you can have various supports. Some supports have rollers on top, so that as the timber touches it, so they roll. Okay, and you can have 2 or 3 of these, and they'll help to give support to hold the timber to the correct height. Occasionally when you're putting timber through a saw, you'll find that the timber has got moisture on the inside that's greater than the moisture on the outside. And what happens then is, as the timber's cut, so the timber wants to close in on the saw. At that particular stage, it's very important that you have some little wedges handy that you can pop into the saw. It shouldn't really cause too much of a problem, funnily enough, because the riving knife will always be in place. Very important that you have portable extraction. Now, it can be portable extraction, which is just like a small hoover that's attached to the saw, and it turns itself on automatically when the saw is turned on, or have a fixed extraction system. A fixed extraction system is where the tubes go up and across the ceiling. They normally go outside into a large hopper and straight into bags. Now, cross-cutting is another operation. Now, ripping goes down the grain, cross-cutting goes across the grain. That may sound fairly obvious, but it's very important when you're working with very important that when you're working with a large circular saw, that you take great precautions to make sure that this timber is safe. It's very important that, first of all, that the saw is at its height, not low down, and that's because if you lower it down, right the way down, then the teeth are facing forward. They're facing forward. They sometimes will go even into nearly a negative hook. It's very important when the teeth are at the top that the teeth are pushing the wood down as they're cutting. They're pushing it down. You don't want it to be low down when it's pushing forward into the wood. There is a tendency when that happens for the timber to lift a little, and then it'll ride over the saw, and then the saw then will take hold of it and throw it. So it's very important that the saw is at the maximum height. I talked a minute ago about push sticks, and yes, there's lots of different types of push sticks, and there's also spikes, as I said, and these tools are extensions of your hand. You never, never, never begin a saw until the push sticks are right next to you and ready to be used. Now the reason for that is you might be halfway through cutting something, and if you can't reach for your push stick, well then what are you going to do? You're going to turn the machine off with the wood halfway through? No, you need to make sure in advance that the push sticks are always next to you and ready for you. There are certain things that can be done to help you in the cutting process if you need to do angle cuts. Now on the angle cuts you can either use a bed piece, which is a piece of timber at the correct angle on the bed of the saw, so the timber then is tilted and can cut through, and of course you're able to take the fence and adjust it very often, or canting it as they call it, so the timber can be cut through at an angle. Or another way of doing it is to have a complete saddle. Now a complete saddle is used for arris ripping, and this is where you have a complete V shape. Okay, it's made to go over the top of the blade, and then what you do is you lock it into place, and then you just pass your timber straight through, and this can turn a square into two arris rails. Arris rails are very, very important in the building industry, and also especially important for fencing. Fencing uses a lot of arris ripping. Now the next machine that we need to think about is the morticer. A morticer is a relatively complicated machine. However, it's one of those machines that actually is not really very safe. It's just basically a drilling machine, that's all. You need to be able to recognize all the different features of a morticer. For example, you've got adjustment wheels. There's usually 2, sometimes 3 and 4. A wheel that as you turn it either way, it causes the bed upon which the timber is clamped to slide each way. But some machines are more sophisticated than that. They'll have other wheels which will cause the bed not only to go either way, but another wheel that'll make it go front to back. Okay, so those are extra additions that are important. There's a clamp at the front of the machine that clamps the wood against a solid fence. Usually the fences are cast iron. Sometimes they'll have stops, but almost certainly they'll have a depth stop. And so as you bring the arm down and you drill the hole, drill the mortise, so it'll go down to a certain point and stop, and then you release it. The on and off button is very close so that you can just touch it when you need to, and the motor is usually quite a powerful motor. Now you say to me, well, what's the point of a morticer? Well, the point of a morticer is to be able to make mortises. Now a mortise is a square hole in wood. It's a square hole in wood. So how on earth can a circular thing make a square hole? Well, it's because it has a special chisel that surrounds the drill, and that chisel is completely square, and it's got a hollow bit, and it's been sharpened very, very sharp, so that as it comes down, as the middle is cutting, so the outside of the wood is turned in onto the cutter and it all comes out the top. So you end up drilling with a round bit, and you end up with a square hole. Now these machines are relatively tricky to set up. It's something that you need to do by yourself, but with some experts helping you. And it's one of these things which is a little technical, but it's not that difficult to do. In most workshops, joiners have somebody that is the person that normally sets it up, somebody that's very experienced, but you need to actually become conversant with it as well. Okay, so that's the morticer, and it's something, as I said, better felt than told, better experienced than talked about. The other machine that you'll come across is the narrow bandsaw. Now a narrow bandsaw is a large blade that's very thin in its width, but also fairly deep, but not too deep, and it goes round two large wheels, a wheel at the top and a wheel at the bottom. And it continuously goes in a continuous, and between the two there'll be the body of the machine holding the left hand side up, and then the wheel will be in the top part, and then the blade comes down over a large open space. And what you're able to do with a bandsaw is you're able to do all sorts of cutting. You're able to do ordinary ripping, you can do cross cutting, but you can also turn circles, and you can follow lines around. So it's an exceptionally useful tool to have in a workshop. They come in all sorts of sizes. They come as little tabletop models, they even come as large tabletop models, they'll come as small units that are fitted on the floor, and then also big units fitted on this floor. All of these tools have to be tensioned when they're put into use, and the tensioning on all these machines is a little bit tricky. It's something that each machine has its own particular way of tensioning. When you're changing a blade, as you will need to do, it's very important that you change the blade and then you make the blade run in the center of the wheels, the center of the wheel above and below. The wheels themselves have what's called a tire on them. They have some rubber that's actually attached to the steel. It's very important that the blade runs in the center of that wheel. If it doesn't run in the center, then the bearings will eventually run out. They will wear out, because instead of it running freely, it's running with pressure on it all the time. So it's very important that they are central. There's adjustments for guides at the business end of the machine, because there's guides above the table and there's guides below the table. The table surface is where the saw comes into contact with timber, but just above it there's a guide. There's various types. Some of them are little wheels and some of them are little pieces of steel, but the guide needs to just slip between the two, and then all of them have a spinning wheel or a thrust wheel, depending on how people call this, when you put pressure on the saw so the wheel spins. Now this top guide needs to be identically set up to the bottom guide so that they both spin together. You don't want only the top spinning, you want them both to spin identically. It's one of these saws that is beautiful in its use, pretty safe. I recommend about a 12mm gap again between the bottom of the guide and the top of the timber. So I always have a little piece of wood in my pocket, which I've had for many years, and I just take it out, pop it in between the guide and between the surface of the wood, and that gives me the 12mm gap, and then I just break it and away we go. All of these machines are set up in such a way that they have a brake. It's a legal requirement now for all large machines to have a braking system. Now what this means is they're not going to stop instantly, but they're going to take less than 10 seconds to stop. Of course, there's quite a strain on the machine to do that. They're actually stopping something that is driving at quite a fair pelt. So it's very important that these machines should have a stop on them. If an accident occurs, if something goes wrong, you don't want that machine carrying on cutting. You want that machine to come to a halt pretty rapidly. There are some extra things I want to say about some of these machines. The circular saw, for example, the large circular saw, there are some new saws coming on the market now, where the table is electrified and the saw is actually electrified with a very, very minute electrical current. This means that if your finger touched it, a tiny, tiny, tiny little spark would sense your finger and would stop the machine instantly. And I mean an instant stop. And what it does, it flicks the trip switch, what we call a rat trap. It flicks the trip switch and the saw is removed and taken down and it is buried into a block of aluminium, which obviously stops it instantly. Now this is quite a strain on the machine. You wouldn't want to be doing this just for fun all the time. And each of these blocks every time, I think it's true to say that the blade and the block are completely buried within each other. So they have to then be removed and we have to have a new blade and a new block. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So it's a safety feature. Nobody has ever had a finger cut off on a circular saw by using that system. Now these things, as I said, they're much better experienced than talked about, but it's very, very important that you get lots of experience on a circular saw. If you're able to, if there's a lot of repetitive work, make sure that when you're learning, you've always got somebody with you in what they call immediate control. So they're right next to you and they can put your hand out and touch you immediately if you're going to make a mistake. Some mistakes are actually quite dangerous. The other thing to remember is that with all of these tools, especially the circular saw, it's very, very important to have what we call hygiene around the tool. This means that there must not be allowed to be the build-up of debris and offcuts either on the tabletop or on the floor around. Very, very important that you keep the whole of the work area free from debris. I didn't expect this to be a very long video, and the reason for that is because, as I said, I would prefer to be taking you onto a tool and showing you rather than just talking about it, but at least you've got all the main points and the main features of what these saws can do and how to set them up. So there we are. We look forward to speaking to you next time. Have a great day and we'll catch up soon. Bye for now.